Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a weekly movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film and if it truly is a hell of a picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett and I'm sitting across the internet as I do each and every week from the George to my Jerry, Mr. David Hollinshurst. How are you today?
Very good. Yeah, George. Okay.
I figured the hair and the glasses, that's, you're maybe temperament. I'm more of a George and you're more of a Jerry. That would make more sense.
We've all got a little George and a little Jerry in us, but
I've been known to lose my mind, particularly in
you got a little rage, yeah.
Sports, various basketball games over the years. My temperament has not been the best, but like
maybe you can do something in sports. You like sports. You make those great comments during the game.
Yeah.
Be a color man.
Could be a color man.
That's right.
Yeah, but they usually, hold those for, ex-ball players. Yeah, well, that's
people in broadcasting.
People in broadcasting. Well, that's just not fair. But I'll tell you what is fair today is we're back another week. We're doing another great film because Halloween is around the corner, as in like literally tomorrow, I think, or the next day. Depending on when this drops. Something like that. But we're going to do we're going to dive into a little horror movie today, and we're doing Rosemary's Baby. The 1968, I'll say classic. A great American horror film from the 60s that holds up to this day, I think. And it's one that I had to convince David a bit to do because he'd never seen it and he hates horror films. So you hate all horror movies, or just like the scares?
Yeah, I'm just easily rattled by them, and they stick with me for a bit. I still have some issues with things that you made me watch as kids. Hellraiser, I think, was one that was very upsetting. It has never left me. That's for sure.
Oh God.
I'm talking about the original now. Of course have not gone anywhere near the new one. In fact, if it comes up if I'm scrolling through a streaming service and it's there, I will because I can't bear to just even see the poster of it. But you know what? I've come around. I've watched a few recently, in the past few years, because Sam really likes horror movies. So I've had, what have I watched? I've watched all the Screams now, which I think some people would say that's a pretty that's the shallow end of the horror pool for sure. But I have seen those. We watched Urban Legend the other night, the sort of Scream derivative. You remember in the 90s, after Scream was such a runaway success, you had the I Know What You Did, you had the Urban Legends, you had etc. And so we watched that, which was laughable. That was great. With the fact, would you say Faculty?
The Faculty,
right.
Yeah,
Josh Hartnett vehicle, I believe.
That's correct. Yeah,
sexy teens getting stabbed. It's good stuff.
That's what it's worked for all of horror, the whole horror genre. That's what it's. A lot of it's been hot women getting stabbed.
Yeah,
but
basically.
There's a hot woman in this with a knife. She doesn't get stabbed, but she does the stabbing, maybe. But she
probably ought to have stabbed more people. That was her problem.
But yeah,
she had just stabbed more people right away. This thing could have been nipped in the bud.
Yeah, she's done. The interesting thing with Rosemary's Baby is it's sort of, it plays more into the psychological aspect. I mean, there are unnerving parts, obviously, but it plays with paranoia, and it plays with kind of trying to figure out either as Rosemary, the character herself, but also us as the audience, what's real? Is this kind of she making this up? Is this in her head? Are we seeing this from her perspective? So there's not this slew of, certainly not grotesque horror or jump scares or sort of these staples that have come kind of part and parcel with the horror genre as we know it today. This wasn't the horror genre in general back in the 60s and before that, where, you know, there were obviously a lot of horror movies and scary movies, but you know, this sort of started creeping into the artistic horror movie, this kind of like artistic vision. Hitchcock had kind of like a few of these sort of thing, but yeah, this was an interesting sort of like taking an auteur, so to speak, in Roman Polanski and kind of getting his spin on a tale that was a novel. But you'll let us know all about that when you give us a rundown, which I think we should just hop right into. So then I can kind of keep blabbing on about the movie once you've caught everybody up to speed on Rosemary's Baby, which I feel like a lot of people haven't rewatched in a while. So, Dave, do you want to hit us with the rundown?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, great many people may have never seen this. I had not. Had heard of it, but had not watched. And so, if you are totally unfamiliar, this will give you the brief. So, a charming young couple, Guy and Rosemary Woodhouse, are apartment hunting. They're not looking for much. Something spacious with good natural light. A room that could be turned into a nursery. And maybe some history of murder and witchcraft. As it happens, the Bramford ticks all of these boxes. Almost immediately after moving in, they meet the neighbors, Roman and Minnie Castevet, and they begin to wonder if the outgoing tenant had died from an excess of pop-ins. But we soon see that nosy may be the nicest thing you can say about the Castevets, and Rosemary begins to suspect that they, and everyone else in her life, is involved in a sinister plot to steal her baby. Now, despite her doctor's and husband's insistence that she's hysterical, Rosemary is adamant, and eventually learns the truth, that the troubling history of satanic practice at the Bramford is alive and well, and that her baby is the child of Satan himself. Rosemary's Baby was written for screen and directed by Roman Polanski. It was released in 1968 and based off the novel of the same name by Ira Levin. It stars Mia Farrow as Rosemary, John Cassavetes as Guy, and I have to ask, when did the name Guy become the noun Guy? Were there just so many unremarkable guys named Guy that eventually people were like, "Who's that? Nah, it's just some guy. Don't worry about it." You know, it's kind of dismissive of anyone named Guy. Yeah, he's just a guy. It's no big deal. Anyway, Ruth Gordon as Minnie, and Sidney Blackmer as Roman, Ralph Bellamy as Dr. Abe Saperstein. And if anyone is a Parks and Rec fan, that's an interesting little Easter egg hidden within that show. The Henry Winkler character on Parks and Rec plays Dr. Saperstein. He is also an obstetrician. So, yeah, I think that didn't happen by accident. Yeah, it's kind of
certainly didn't.
That's a fun little thing thrown in there. So the film cost about $3.2 million to make, and it brought in a very healthy $33 million at the box office. It received 2 Oscar noms, one for Best Supporting Actress for Ruth Gordon, and that was a victory, and I would say well-deserved. She is pretty incredible as Minnie in this film. And the second being Best Adapted Screenplay for Polanski, which he did not win. The big winners that year included Oliver, with an exclamation mark. So that's top of the muffin to you, and Oliver. And that garnered Best Director for Carol Reed and Best Picture for producer John Wolfe. And another interesting note on that year's Oscars, the nominees for Best Picture included a film called, I'm assuming it's pronounced Rachel, though I am very tempted to pronounce it in the Seinfeldian way, which is, of course, Rochelle. But I regret to say, this is not a young woman's erotic journey from Milan to Minsk. Rather, it is the Paul Newman passion project about a despondent woman living above a funeral parlor in rural Connecticut. Sounds riveting. I think I like the Seinfeld version better. And that is your rundown.
Oh, lots of Seinfeld references in there.
Yeah.
It's not right. Top of the muffin to you. No, it is.
No, it is. To you.
Oliver.
Yeah, Oliver. Did you ever watch that?
No, though I am aware. The 2 Oscar noms, I really feel like Polanski should have got a director nomination for this. And I really think it's kind of a travesty that Mia Farrow didn't get a Best Leading actress for this, because man, she is so good. Before she went into this role, she was kind of on like a was like a soap opera, I think it was called. It's like something I had read it earlier. Because she was like she was like a kind of a TV star. Like her parents obviously were in the business, and she sort of got her start on what was the name of the show? It was some like weird random show. I know. Peyton Place. Yeah. Primetime soap opera. Yeah. Ah. And so when she kind of it was Polanski that wanted her, and the kind of the producers and people were like, no, we don't want to. Come on. He's like, no, she's who I want. And I don't know what he saw her in, but he got his way. The interesting thing about Rosemary's Baby, this is Polanski's first American film and first film that he adapted, and he got, as you mentioned, a best adapted screenplay nomination for this. The author of the book, after Ira Levin wrote it. It was already sold to be made into a film, and they said at the end that he was like blown away by Rosemary, like what was came about it at the end. He said, he's quoted as saying like Polanski, it was his first adaptation from a novel, and it's like Ira was like, I don't think he knew that he could change a bunch of things, because it was like literally pages of like dialogue that was like verbatim from the screenplay to the novel. Yeah. Like he kept it very, very true to the novel. And he said it was like the best version of an adaptation that's ever been done. Now he's a bit biased, but like it is very true to the novel. One interesting thing I wanted to, maybe I'll save that. I wanted to talk about sort of the introduction to the film, to one of the opening lines, but I'll save that for later. But again, going back to sort of the beginnings of this film, when it was sold, I think it was sold to William Castle, and he was sort of shopping it around, trying to get money from a bunch of different studios, and he met with Paramount, and they like loved it, and they were like, yeah, let's like adapt it. And they were like, I think they offered it to like Hitchcock, and they offered it to like somebody else, and it was like sort of turned down. And when it got to Paramount, when Paramount like wanted to put money into it, they brought it on to Robert Evans, who was the producer. And so William Castle bought it, went to Paramount. Paramount was like, all right, Robert Evans, like take this and now like find your director, find whoever. So he wanted Polanski. So he was like, Polanski had done a couple of movies, one called Repulsion, Knife in the Water, and they were like big in Europe. And they sort of had this cult following in the States. And he was like trying to persuade Polanski to come shoot the film, but he didn't mention Rosemary's Baby. He was pitching him this movie called Downhill Rider, which is like a skiing movie. And Polanski's like a huge skiing buff. So Polanski flew over to New York and was like, and then William Castle was like, Robert Evans was like, yeah, so like, I want you to take a look at the script. And he's like, well, this isn't like Downhill Rider. He's like, no, but it's something we have. And it's like, I'd love for you to take a read of it. Just read it and let me know what you think. Apparently Polanski like started reading it that night, and he was up till like 4 a.m. And he was just like, it was like a page turner. He couldn't stop. No, this was the book. He was reading like a novel, and he was just like reading. He's like, couldn't get it. Like was like obsessed with it. It was like the manuscript or whatever, because it like hadn't even been. So anyway, and they signed on like that the next morning to direct it, and he started writing the adapted screenplay. So yeah, that's just a little backstory of like sort of how the film got made. But the interesting thing about this was kind of the subtlety of the horror. And this is, I mean, this is sort of considered an iconic horror film. When you think about, a lot of times people make their top lists, and this is always seems to be creep its way onto to horror lists. And for you, I guess, because one thing people will say about this is like, it's not like any sort of horror movie I've ever seen, or it's like, it's more of a drama and it has these horror aspects. But I mean, it's very much, about the devil and witches and witchcraft. And it's like, it's not subtle at all. So like, do you think that it really does fall within that horror genre, or is it more kind of like plays itself out as a artistic drama that kind of has these horror elements?
Yeah, I think you just struck it really well there. That yeah, it is a dramatic film with horror aspects to it. Even though those being satanic practice, witchcraft, sexual assault from the devil. There's there's some pretty vile things in here, but they are done in a very measured, very, very subtle kind of way. And all throughout, I was thinking while I was watching this movie would actually work as a mundane film. And by mundane, I don't mean boring. I just mean as if it was absent of the supernatural, this would still work. Because I found I was genuinely interested in the relationship between Rosemary and Guy, the nosy neighbors, just all the surroundings of it. I found this actually just worked as a mundane picture. And that was really interesting to me. And just there was this additional layer of the supernatural put on top of it. And yeah, it was almost the most horrifying thing about this was almost the normalcy of it. At the end, like when they come in, she has the knife, as you mentioned. It's the only time anyone bears arms in this whole thing. She gets the knife. She goes in through that secret door, and she comes in, and there's like a cocktail party with the child of Satan in a pram. And it's just sort of this really weird thing where everybody's behaving totally normally. They're sitting around, they're either having a coffee or a martini, and there's just this black pram with the child of Satan there with an inverted cross. And yeah, that just how normal that all seemed was actually the most frightening part of the whole film for me.
Yeah, I love that you say that. It was very like, they're just all like, oh, and then they're like, kind of like, don't even like, even Guy's sort of response. He's just sort of like, F. She's like sort of found out. She's just like, what the fuck is this? And they're like, oh, okay, so you found out. So like, here, we're all witches. It's all here.
That's right.
It's like, oh my God. A lot of people kind of claim that sort of that ending, for some people, it doesn't quite work. I mean, I love the ending, but some people think that it's like, well, maybe it would have been better if it was sort of like this, like, is she crazy or is she paranoid, or like, is it actually happening, or is it all in her head? I was like, I think we still sort of kind of get that. But at the same time, it's like, I sort of like that. It's like, yep, no, this is what it is. Cause it's like, we're setting it up for the whole film like that. Right. So it's like to sort of have just a mundane ending where it's sort of like implied that she is like, she's not maybe crazy, but it's like up to the, I don't know, like sometimes you don't need like subtlety in that. Like sometimes you don't need like, oh, it needs to be like the audience needs to decide like what it is or whatever. Sometimes it's just like, this works because, that's what we've been showing throughout the whole film. Right. And then the kind of tone, and it kind of shifts from like, okay, so she's not crazy. This is actually happening. Now it turns to like, well, what's she going to do about the baby? And that's that's the interesting turn. It's not so much like, okay, right. So we're leading up to that, and we're sort of forgetting that it's like, well, she's still given birth to this. She still carried this thing, this maternal idea that a lot of women have. Like the women talk about it all the time. My wife talks about it with our kids. Like, she's like, you have this connection that you can't really like put into words. Like, it's different being a father than being a mother. Like you're carrying this being, it's a part of you. And then like when you realize, okay, wait, no, it is actually half the devil. So how are you going to react to that? And then you got to get those moments with her at the very end, which are really, really kind of amazing, I think, and really kind of puts tap to the film.
Well, you're right, because we get throughout the movie this speculation on, is she losing it? Is she imagining this?
Yes.
Yeah. Is she just paranoid? Is she hysterical? Whatever. So I think dispensing with that at the end is the right thing. Okay, this is real. This has happened to her, and then the ambiguity comes in where you're left to wonder, well, what is her ultimate choice? Because the last thing that's said to her is, will you be a mother to Adrian? Adrian being the name of this spawn of Satan. And the look on her face, like you say, like there is this irrefutable instinct that is kicking in, this powerful, powerful connection that, like this child might be the spawn of Satan. It may have been born through horrible ritual and rape, but it is still my child. Even though she's horrified to look it in the eyes. But then there's this look that she gives, and it's delivered so impeccably by Mia Farrow. You're so right to say that she deserved, more. She was nominated for a BAFTA, I think, for her performance, which is good to hear. But there's just this sort of wondering, well, what's she going to do? And I thought it was interesting that the film ended and began with the same music and that same kind of panning shot over top of the apartment building. And
yes,
it's almost like something about that to me says a return to normalcy, or like there's an inevitability, I guess, to what has happened. It happened before, it's happened again, and this is what's going to happen. And so I liked that. It suggests to me that yes, she is going to acquiesce, whether she joins the cult or whatever she does. She is going to be a mother to this child, and whatever comes of it, because regardless of who the father is, she is still the mother. And I thought that was I loved it as an ending. I can understand why there would be dissent, but I loved it.
Yeah. I love that. It's like you said, it sort of starts with those kind of swooping shots over Manhattan and then ends sort of the same sort of way. It's interesting. You mentioned in the beginning too. I was reading an article about the film, and the film, one change that Polanski did make, because like as I was saying, he did stay very true to the novel, was he added a line in the beginning when the agent is showing them it's like the first line of the whole film, one of the first lines, and he says, are you a doctor? And then Guy says yes, and then Mia says, or Rosemary says, oh, he's an actor. And it's like the movie begins. It seems like kind of a throwaway line, right? You don't really think twice about it. But then really that just foreshadows the whole film, and Guy's deceit, but also the choice that Polanski made using a doctor. Like, it's not like she says, oh, are you a lawyer, or are you like a city planner, or like whatever? Are you an architect?
An architect? Yeah.
I always wanted to be an architect. She says, doctor.
I always wanted to pretend to be an architect.
It's the doctor, right? Because, but it's just interesting because it's like the people that betray her and deceive her throughout the movie are actors, her husband, Guy, and doctors. The doctors deceive her throughout and cause her for her hysteria and her confusion throughout the whole film. So it's just like an interesting little like thing that he threw in there that seems like a throwaway line, but then at the very end of the film, you sort of get all the doctors are in on it, and her husband's in on it. And there's all these people, they're all actors. They're all acting and pretending, and they're deceiving her, even from her husband at the beginning.
That's interesting. There was a part in here where I wondered if there was something, an attack of sorts on, I guess, the medicinal establishment, like sort of pharma, sort of big pharma or sort of or modern medicine or something like that. It almost seemed like there was something in that, because they sort of take this naturalistic approach. The doctor is very dismissive of vitamins and stuff like that. And I sort of dismissed it after a while. I was like, no, I think that's just sort of part of the, of what they're doing. Obviously that tonic that they give her, that gross looking smoothie, that was just part of their sort of ritual practice. I don't know if there is actually a comment in there, but I sort of did consider it. And now that you mention that, doctors are a big part of this whole subterfuge. maybe there is something there. Maybe Polanski was an anti-vaxxer. I don't know, but there was seemed like there might have been something in there. Who's to say?
I don't know. I think it's more of just a case of just like that's a kind of an interesting plot device to kind of set up the deception that follows, right? The paranoia.
I think so.
Follows.
I think you're right.
There's, like you said, there's the interesting part about this film is sort of the normalcy of the film. And you're sort of watching this woman as she goes through her pregnancy, and a lot of things seem normal, and it gets played as normal by the other characters. Again, the deceiving characters. You're fine. You're not feeling sick. This is normal. Like, keep drinking this smoothie, playing off a woman's hysteria or a woman's like paranoia. Like, what this isn't normal. Like, I don't know though. Like, is it? Like, people I trust are telling me this. But yeah, maybe don't trust your nosy neighbors, and certainly don't drink their weird smoothies.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
I don't know. It's but like, yeah, I found that the guy character too is quite interesting, and like, again, this sort of like this normal relationship they have, sort of presented at the beginning. It's like he is sort of this loving husband, but he does have this sort of like, it's the subtleness of his like how he's presented as kind of only really caring about himself to a degree, right? Like, he sort of goes through the motions on things, but it's just like, it's interesting. It's like all the talk about like, she obviously loves him and like puts him on a pedestal, like more so than obviously he does with her. She says to anybody that'll listen, like, oh, he's an actor, and he's like, he's done a lot of theater and like
been in Hamlet and Luther, and
and again, he's like waiting by the TV to watch his like Yamaha commercial, like, you know what I mean? It's
That's
like
right.
she's so proud of him, and she's so supportive of him, which sort of makes makes his turn that much more believable, right? Like, where it's like, yeah, he would kind of do this because he does sort of feel like a piece of shit, even though he isn't. The interesting thing too is Cassavetes, who's a director and played Guy, and he's like a renowned American independent filmmaker, and he's done a ton of. I have this box set here. I don't know if I showed this. I have this box set of like his movies that Criterion put out.
Okay.
He's done a bunch of movies, but like he is like, he's sort of been known like as sort of one of the American visionary independent filmmakers of that time, and he has like some really amazing pieces of art and film. We should talk about his movies sometime, but he's known. Sure. A lot of his stuff is based around improv. And he lets cameras run and lets like actors sort of do their thing and go like off script and sort of, that's how he plays. Polanski is completely different. Like, he was saying, Mia Farrow's kind of in a few interviews was saying like, if you picked up this thing, it's like you'd have to pick it up. If he wants it picked up like this, it's got to be picked up like this. It can't be picked up like that or like here. You know what I mean? It's like, to a T. Like, Polanski is very like structured, wanted everything a certain way, whereas like Cassavetes was very free flowing in how his process. So they actually butted heads like crazy, and they were like almost got into a fight on set, which is kind of hilarious to think about. Roman Polanski trying to beat somebody up.
Yeah, maybe he should have got tuned up. Might have helped us all out a little bit. It's interesting though, like that you mentioned that about Cassavetes, because his character, it kept like, there would always be these moments where I thought he was going to take a very obvious turn for the shitty. Like it seemed like, because he is kind of selfish, and ultimately it's selfishness that drives him to do this horrible thing. Like the betrayal is absolutely despicable. He agrees to give his wife to this cult for their ritual so that she can be raped by Satan and carry his baby to term. and he goes along with it in order to further his career. That is the price paid. That is his reward for doing.
But he
this.
can justify.
But he gets to, because he's doing it for them. He's doing it for the family. And like, but really, it's ultimately. Yeah. It's ultimately it's a selfish motivation. But throughout the film, though, like, and what sort of preserves the sense of wondering, I think, in the audience is that when you think he's going to take a really obviously bad turn, he doesn't. He always sort of course corrects, and like he'll bring flowers, and he'll do something. Like, there's always something that makes you think, like, no, he's still okay, and it doesn't. You don't quite make up your mind on him, which I think is really important. And I mentioned how, and we both talked about this, how this there's a normalcy to this movie and just a really solid dramatic backbone to the film, which I really did like. But I wrestled with this throughout the watch through in terms of whether I wanted more of weirdness in a fashion similar to Enemy, the Villeneuve picture that we talked about. It felt like there was some meat left on the bone. And when I said that to myself, I sort of found that I pushed back against myself a little bit because I didn't want to see the modern interpretation of this movie. I didn't want it to get too out of pocket because there's a dignity to this movie that I think comes from how measured it is. Like they slow play the Satan, and I appreciate that. And yeah, I was sort of torn as to, I knew I wanted a bit more. I didn't know how much more. It would be inches, not miles. You know what I mean? Did you find something similar to that? Like it didn't quite reach its own potential?
Yeah, I think it's a different time too, right? Like I think we have to keep, when we're watching older films, this movie is what, 50, 60 years old now, almost?
Yeah, it would be almost 60. Yeah, 55.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's something to be said about that. Like, this movie really did pave the way for a lot of future horror films, and stylistically, but like also like, what was the content. The Omen, The Exorcist came out kind of like 4 or 5 years later. The Exorcist. I just said The Exorcist. I meant the Omen. Damien. You've seen The Omen, right?
Sure.
Yeah, he's just
he's
devil. This devil's son.
I thought he was the devil's helper. It's pretty scary for a helper. I don't know.
He's just a rambunctious
little kid. Yeah,
he's just Damien's a rambunctious kid. Anyways, but I guess my point was just that, like, trying to keep things in perspective, I guess, when you're watching things, that like, this sort of in some way paved the way for films to take that, I don't want to say risk, but take that like chance in pushing a little further on some things.
Was that consistent with the genre at the time though? Like, I mean, would if you watched horror in this era, would you have seen something more akin to this? Or because when The Exorcist comes along, as you point out, just a few years later, that is shocking in comparison. Like there's some pretty horrifying, like legitimately horrifying. I remember you and I went to see with our girlfriends at the time The Exorcist when it was re-released in theaters, and I was just
actually.
oh yeah, man. And I was in a bad way during that freaking movie. Like I lost so much face in the watching of that movie.
I had a poster.
Came across as a total coward.
Dude, I had a poster in my room of like the full on Exorcist, like when she's like in full in makeup and she's like smiling. I had it like in my room. I was like,
you're
upset.
A sick man. Sick man.
Horror films, to fill people in, horror movies is what got me into movies in general. Like I was watching stuff before I was like, I don't know, 3-4 years old. I was watching horror movies. And then like I started, when I got heavy into them and just movies in general, when I was a teenager, it was the horror genre, and I became obsessed. And, so, but like, I guess at the time, the interesting thing is that people with Polanski, like it's very much a choice that he doesn't show anything, it's sort of like these, like, the claws, the sort of the tail, whatever, like in the novel, they like, it's like very much, I can't remember the wording, but it's like, they show or however it's written, it's like she sees the spawn of Satan, and like it's described. It's like it had like horns and had like a tail and had whatever, and like this is just like all sort of in our head, and that's kind of what makes it even scarier, right? Because it's like, yeah, you have movies like The Exorcist, which come out a few years later, and like you said, it's like it's grotesque and it's graphic, but again, like I would sort of like, once you sort of see that stuff, it's like, okay, now what, right? Like, it is hard to watch for a lot of people watching like the little girl possessed and like spewing out and crawling backwards and like these grotesque things. But I don't know, like once you sort of like, it's almost like ripping off a Band-Aid, or like what's worse, kind of playing it out in our head, or like sort of seeing it. It's the same as Psycho, right? Like, so in Hitchcock's Psycho, they had everybody's sort of familiar with the beginning of that film, right? So that was made in 1960, and like everybody sort of thinks about that shower scene, right? And if you actually watch it back, you get her screaming, you get obviously that the music is like iconic, that builds up towards like her, and you see the knife going up, and you see like kind of the blood pooling at the bottom in black and white, but you never see the action of like a knife going into somebody or getting stabbed. But like it's how our brain or how our mind interprets things, right? It's the same sort of thing in here when you're watching Rosemary's Baby, and it's like whatever they show or whatever they could create, it's like it's never gonna play in our heads as scary. Like we're always going to play it in our heads scarier than it actually is. And that's what's sort of lasting, and that's what sort of works, I think. And that's what, like, even when we're talking about like, like now in films, like where there's like the makeup and the practical effects have gotten like so good that you watch some stuff and you're like, oh my God, but it's more like a shock, right? Versus like when you're sort of playing things off in your head and you're watching a horror movie now, I mean, again, it sort of depends on what it is, but you're like, there's a lot of times the moments that are sort of we play in our head become scarier than what you could ever show or what you could ever create in a makeup studio or a digital effects or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think what was missing for me is you're right. First of all, you're absolutely right that if you leave things to imagination, it is more powerful in a lot of cases.
Yeah,
and I think what I wanted was just more weirdness, not more graphic stuff. I didn't need necessarily to see the baby. I think it's more effective if you don't. I think I wanted more cult stuff. I wanted a little more of sort of the history there and maybe sort of what they're up to. But then I pushed back against myself on that because I find now there's this compulsion to give too much detail on that stuff. And everybody needs the origin of this, and you need to know where this came from. And then you sort of get it. This when this thing becomes a project of modernity, I think it becomes less effective. So I kind of wanted to see more culty stuff, but yeah, I wrestle with it. I'm not sure. But, with speaking of cults, Christian and Catholic imagery come up a lot in this film. They're peppered throughout. Do you like that seamless transition? How about that?
Oh, that was good. That was good.
And it does. It's there a lot, quite a bit. It's very prevalent in the film. They have that conversation about the Pope at dinner the first time they meet the cast, the neighbors. Rosemary has that hallucination, which I guess is sort of part of the ritual. She's been drugged, and she sort of conflates what's happening to her with, I guess, her experience as a Catholic schoolgirl. You see the nuns and stuff like that. Roman is kind of this anti-pope in the satanic cult. And then you see when she's at the doctor, she's reading Time magazine, and the headline says, "Is God dead?" And that was a pretty pointed statement, or I guess question, that made the film, or that the film made. And it made me think of the quote from the French philosopher Voltaire, who says, if God didn't exist, it would be necessary to invent him. And I feel like what we see in this movie is very similar to that. People need or want what God and the institutions surrounding God provide. And the absence or loss of God, they will provide it in some other way.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting take. I mean, the Catholicism in the film is obviously very prevalent, like you said. Yeah, but I guess the counter to that is sort of like, well, if God is there, then so is the devil, right? And it's like, if God doesn't exist, then it's like, I don't know if the film is saying whether God exists or, or the devil exists. I just feel like it's saying like, I don't know, cults exist maybe, but like, it's very, yeah, like I know for like Mia Farrow, she said like, she grew up, she was like very close to becoming a nun. Like she was raised very Catholic, and she was very close to almost joining, and then was like, and then didn't. So then when she she actually had a problem in the sort of the last scene when they're calling it, all saying like, "Hail Satan!" They're "Hail Satan." She was like, that's a bit problematic. You know what I mean? She's like, but she was like, the way she could get around it for herself anyway, is that she was like, well, I guess I'm not saying it. So it's like, so I guess it's okay, but
just say a few Hail Marys in your trailer afterwards and you'll be okay. But yeah, I think I'm not so much saying that the film is questioning the existence of God or Satan, but rather that people need what it provides, even in a very simple way. Like you see, like the neighbors are very judgy, and they talk about the judgment. And you see it like with Minnie, like, she's asking how much the furniture costs, and like, oh, what you did with it, and like, there's this element to that, sort of like filling this. If God is gone from our society, if we're becoming more atheist, we are still going to supply, or sorry, I guess perform a lot of what God and the church supplied, which in a lot of cases was judgment. And that's sort of something that people, like, it's almost something people need. And the other aspects of it too, like you hear it when you listen to the cult, their litany, when they're saying praise Satan, it's not all that different from the way people praise God. The cult itself is just sort of this new shade of Catholicism, the ritual, the robes. Roman is dressed up very much as the Pope. It's all very Catholic, and like the son of Satan, born to a mortal woman. It's sort of this perversion of immaculate conception. They've denounced God and just replaced it with something very similar. It's just sort of the different side of the same coin almost. And yeah, it's funny because it makes you think, would that version be any more horrifying than the Catholicism we know? I mean, how many more kids can you molest, really? I mean, like, would their crusades and inquisitions be bloodier? It's sort of, I feel like there is something to be said there by the film.
No, I mean, that's I don't want to say a whole other debate, but I don't disagree with you. It certainly is. I don't know if Rosemary's
Baby. It's a whole other conversation.
But it was, like you said, it's very pointed and very, very clear what they're referencing, even in that last moment, like you said, which dressed as sort of the Pope, and they're conducting these rituals. It's like, it's the other side of the coin, right? But the coin is the same coin, right? Or it's not the same thing, but it's
two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. It's the opposites, right? It's like
it's bizarre. It's bizarro Catholicism.
It's bizarro Catholicism. That's right. But I want to touch on how women are treated too in the film, and sort of a reflection as sort of how women are treated just in society in general, and sort of the idea of misogyny, but also hysteria that has been linked to women, and just like certainly pregnant women. And that's sort of what we struggle with throughout the whole film, is getting a sense of, like, we're obviously presented Rosemary as sort of this, she's the hero of the film, I mean, obviously, but we're presented her, we're questioning if what she's feeling is real and accurate. And I just feel like that was just such a strong depiction of of what a lot of women have felt and gone through, you know, their validation of, you know, things that have happened to them, and they have to, too often, I feel, and this, like we said, this was made almost 60 years ago, and it was obviously an issue then, and just has been a continued issue throughout our kind of society and culture. It's like the justification of what a woman is feeling and what a woman is going through is sort of like an issue that is raised in this film and continues to be raised in modern day society.
Yeah, it's funny. When I'm watching this, I started thinking, is this a feminist story that is written by a misogynist? Because there's weird sort of dueling things in here where it's because Rosemary is constantly patronized and condescended to and controlled by the men in her life, and it feels like we're supposed to recognize that, but at the same time, I don't think the film ever really liberates her from that either. You know, like the doctor, we talked about the influence of doctors in it, and he tells her, you know, I think verbatim here, don't read books, don't talk to your friends, just listen to me. And it almost sounds like a cult right off the hop. They're trying to separate her and isolate her from people she knows and from outside influences. And there's certainly some comment there on literacy and how, you know, keeping people subjugated through lack of education and things like that. And, you know, her husband does the same thing. He takes the book away from her, that book about, you know, where she's learning about the witches. And when he does it, it's almost like he's taking a toy away from a child.
Yeah, he puts it on like the top of a shelf. Like he's just like, oh, I'm going to put this up here.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like you fall in line sort of thing. Yeah. Again, it's brilliant sort of noticing of that. Like that was awesome.
Did you see too the books that he lays it on top of? They're two books, and one of them is the sexual behavior in the human female, and the other book is sexual behavior in the human male. And I found that kind of interesting because, like books in the social sciences, particularly in that time, I think it's gotten a bit better. But like sexual bias was very prevalent in like psychology and things like that, and still is, I'm sure. And it was used, and I think you touched on this just before. It was used in a way like it used pseudoscience and like bad logic and intellectualism to justify men's actions as creeps and to perpetuate bad ideas on women. Like, oh, they're hysterical. They're just like, you know, quiet down, young lady. Your emotions have gotten the best of you. You must be on your monthlies and stuff like that. Yes. You know, it's sort of. I think there was, you know, attention drawn to that. I feel like that those books didn't happen by accident. And yeah, like sort of, but talking about the idea that it is kind of drawing our attention to these negative ideas on women and also not really, it's not really a feminist story though at the same time, because there's this sexualizing and also infantilizing of Rosemary throughout. The way she's shot, the way she's dressed, how she acts. There's a childlike quality to her.
Oh, absolutely.
But yet it also goes to lengths to make her appear very nubile. And obviously our interpretation is going to be influenced by what we know now. But does it kind of seem like the warning signs were there for Polanski? Like just in the way this sort of, like, I mean, did you notice how she's only like mildly upset when Guy tells her that he had sex with her when she was unconscious? Like during the ritual, when the horrible thing happens, his explanation is like, "Oh, well, you passed out, and it was supposed to be baby night, so I had sex with you." And you know, he doesn't think it's a big deal. She's only a little bit upset by it. And did that kind of feel like indicative of an opinion to you?
I think a couple things. Different time. Not that was like justified, but like you said, like there's textbooks or things that like sort of prevalent within culture. That's just sort of like a man's pleasure or a man's desires or what a man needs trumps that of a woman's, right?
Yes.
But I will also say, like, again, I'm not justifying this, but I'm just sort of saying, like, justifying it in the sense of like the script and the screenplay of like the justification kind of makes sense. 'Cause, you know, a lot of times women have a hard time like men and women couples, they have hard time conceiving, right? So like a lot of times, like when there is that window, it's sort of like it does have to be done. That's not justifying him,
right.
having sex with his unconscious wife, but it's sort of like, then that's why I sort of like that reaction she gives. She's sort of like, you still did that? He's like, well, like it was like we needed to. So it's like you kind of like, there is sort of justification, and it's sort of like in a weird way makes sense, even though it's like absolutely batshit crazy and horrible. But like,
yeah,
you can sort of, it's like I could see how a couple could be like, could justify it to one another, and they could be like, well, no. And that's why it sort of works within the context of the film. I will say though, I read that in the a little book comes in the Criterion of this of Rosemary's Baby, and you were talking about her being like kind of like childlike and just like it's interesting. Again, I mentioned of the novel, it was like this stuck pretty true to the novel, and in this sort of write-up, they actually gave notes from Ira Levin's like published book. Like, so like there's the published book, but then there's also like notes that he wrote about the characters, which is like really interesting. It's like he wrote this just for like his own, how an author will write and be like, I just know like everything sort of about, and there's things that like, so this whole write up here is all about Rosemary, along a pretty, healthy, energetic housewife and happy to be. And she like clips recipes, and she's was born in Omaha, the youngest of 7 children. She likes sex and would like a little more, would love to have children. This is her career, and thinks that Guy will be the one to do it. She's happy, optimistic, easygoing. She trusts, loves, and worships Guy. He's Prince Charming. And then like, it's all these sort of like, and then Hutchins helps enlighten her when she arrives in New York, and was the first to take her seriously on an intellectual plane. Politically, she is liberal, but very suspicious of little suspicious that good values are being lost along the way. And it's just like, so I think she has big-eyed wonder, and she thinks Guy is witty and sophisticated. It's like, I say all of that to sort of say, like, I think it was already there in the novel, like her sort of her pixie-esque, like hippie kind of freewheeling positive attitudes, or that which can be kind of related, I guess, a bit to a child life like interpretation. But I think it's also like it works with the story, right? Because I feel like a cult would want somebody like that, would want somebody that's like obviously can be manipulated, but then also is young enough and fertile enough, and like checks all the boxes, and that sort of like
yeah, and there's an innocence there too, like
yes,
obviously,
exactly.
I think which sort of lends itself to the horror of it, and also there's always this idea that evil, cults, what have you, all of these practices, they require the corruption of an innocent. There has to be that aspect. Like, that's what makes it effective. That's what makes it terrifying for us. That's what makes it effective for them. That, a child or a virgin or something like that. There's always that, those ideas keep coming up. And yeah, I think, it's hard not to see it that way with knowing what we do about Polanski. But I think that what it's more indicative of, or just as indicative of, as you say, is probably an attitude of the time and the way that, female characters were written, women were thought of. And I couldn't just get away from the idea that she was being infantilized throughout, but not in but still in a sexual way. Like, it's like, you're a child, and I also want to have sex with you. And that sort of seemed just something I found inescapable watching it. But, again, I could be applying a lens to that retroactively because of what we know about Roman Polanski.
I just want to clarify. I don't know if I was a bit clear on my last point. Like, having sex with an unconscious wife, even if she's your wife, is not good. And it's a horrible thing, and it's illegal and bad, and I don't want to get like, it. I don't know if I came across as that. I was just saying.
No, like, no, I did not interpret it that way.
Yeah, within the justification of the film.
Good to clarify that.
I gotta clarify these things. Don't do it. It's not good. Because I think within the context of the film, it's sort of it can make sense for her because she's like, okay, I guess because of that reason, But again, I just wanted to clarify that.
And I think you're right too. I think that might have seemed a more plausible justification at the time,
right?
And again, so something of the time, wrong then, wrong now, but maybe more plausible. Exactly. Maybe more plausible to people at the time. I don't know, but I certainly found it like, oh, like really, she's okay with that, and that kind of, again, that suggested to me an opinion of director and writer that it is okay to have sex with an unconscious person because, as we know, that is essentially what he did. And so,
one more thing I want to note. And we'll end up Polanski on that. We're not doing any more Polanskis. We're doing the two Polanskis and we're out. One thing I wanted to note before we get into letting everybody know if this is a hell of a picture, I want to talk a little bit about the movie poster and like the iconic movie poster, which is not in focus there. There you go. It's like the iconic one with Mia Farrow. It's kind of Rosemary's shot from the side, looking up, the baby carriage, and like this. There's this really interesting story about it, right? So they shot the film. It was done. Robert Evans, the producer I mentioned earlier, was like, "How the fuck am I going to market this thing?" It's like it's pushing 2.5 hours. It's over 2 hours. It's this artistic film. Like how am I going to get a movie poster? How am I going to market this thing to get it out? So he brought it to this guy, Stephen Frankfurt, I think, who ran a marketing agency called Young and Republican Ad Agency in the 60s, I guess. Anyways, he was like, I don't know how to he's like, he watched the movie and he's like, yeah, man, this is an amazing movie, but like, I don't know how you're going to sell this. Like, essentially he was like, this is a very difficult, it's like, I don't know what to do because like, how do you get people in the theaters for a movie like this? So he said, you know what? Stephen Frankfurt said, you know what I'm going to do is I'll create a marketing campaign for you. He's like, if you don't have to pay me, but if you like it, you have to pay me my fee, which was $100,000. So he said, okay, that's fair. I'm like, sure. So the marketing campaign was the white Helvetica font that said, "Pray for Rosemary's Baby." And they put up these billboards around. It was just on the white font on the black background, "Pray for Rosemary's Baby." And they sort of started littering these billboards around, I guess, around New York and around LA and Hollywood and stuff. People are like, well, who the hell's Rosemary's Baby? It's a very dramatic, it's like a simplistic thing, a simplistic idea. And it was sort of the first marketing movie to sort of do that. Just to sort of have this like, we're sort of, we see a lot of that around just like simple font on a black background or something. This was this first movie, I think, to kind of do that. And so they had this out for Pray for Rosemary's Baby for a while. And then they released the movie poster. And that's what this part was, like the second part, which was this like this, again, the best sort of movie posters are ones that like, are images that aren't necessarily in the film, like this image isn't in the film. Right. And it's just, it sort of says a lot of what this is. It's again, it's this simple idea of this, like, what represents the baby? It's a carriage. And then you have this sort of like ghost-like figure in the background, blankly staring up to the sky. It's like, it's iconic. And it's like, those are the ones that sort of work. And, and we've seen that a lot over the course, a lot in horror movies too. But yeah, I just want to mention that the movie poster is just one that sort of has stuck with me and stuck with, I think, a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting too. The ambiguity of the marketing campaign, "Pray for Rosemary's Baby," doesn't tell you anything about the movie. It doesn't even. I mean, did it even reference that there was a movie, or was it just like almost just sort of getting this idea? Yeah, no, okay, that's interesting. And I wonder. You mentioned that the advertising firm was Republican. You say?
Yeah, it said it was called Young and Republican. I don't know. It's called Young and Republican Ad Agency. That was just what they sort of like. I came across in my research. I don't know if it's.
That's interesting. I wonder if the anti-abortion sentiments of the film sort of influence that, because there is that one scene where she is vehement that she will not get an abortion. You know, when she's talking to her friends and she's unwell, and the idea of getting an abortion is so repugnant to her, more repugnant than the eventual idea of raising the baby of Satan, which I thought was an interesting idea. And yeah, I don't know. I wonder if there was something that ad agency, if they are conservative in their politics, did they find something in there that they're like, oh yeah, okay, we can make this work.
Maybe I'm getting this wrong. Maybe it's not Republican. I think that's. Oh wait, maybe it's Young and Rubicam? Maybe I spelled it wrong. We're Young and Rubicam?
like the Rubicon, the river?
I don't know. Maybe I'm butchering this, but I don't think it's like a young. Maybe I just in my notes I wrote Republican, but it's not actually Republican. It's like, yeah. Let me just see here. I want to clarify that because it's not.
Yeah, do a quick fact check. We can all hold tight.
Little fact check here. Baby. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's like man. Oh, the story. Okay, here we go. This is what I watched earlier. It's just this little story behind the poster art, which was really cool. And yeah. This is. I'm going to cut all of this out.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
So it's actually called Young and Rubicam. Rubicam. Stephen Frankfurt. Stephen Frankfurt, Young and Rubicam, which is a marketing or an ad agency. So not Republican.
Okay, so forget everything I said about the about the conservative politics. But point remains, though, there is that interesting sort of like she is repulsed by the idea of getting an abortion.
That still stands.
Obviously, a remnant of her Catholic upbringing, and this idea that even if God is dead, the legacy of God and the morality kind of remains, and that apparatus of ethics that the church created, and she finds betraying that way more upsetting than ultimately the idea of raising a hellspawn, which is an interesting thing to consider. That that ethic is so strong. I found that interesting.
The other thing I'll mention before we get into if it's a hell of a picture is this there were sequels. There was another novel, and then there was a prequel that actually just came out called Apartment 7A.
I saw it. I noticed that,
and it's getting somewhat panned in, I think it's got a 40% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Perfect.
So there's
right in that meaty part of the curve.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's terrible, but it's it says here 40% of 5.5. The website's consensus read: Apartment 7A is a slickly assembled and solidly acted, but the lingering memory of Rosemary's Baby and the predictable prequel template make for a subpar release. So
yeah, so I guess it's about the practices that occurred in there, before.
Yeah, it's what happened.
Is it about the earlier witchcraft? Yeah, okay, and the cult.
I would
they do talk about the history of the building in this movie, and that was sort of something that I thought about too watching this. Like if this movie was made again in modern times, would it fall into that? Yeah, like that as they described in the review, that predictable template of the prequel. And just sort of lean into, oh, here's where this came from, and here's what this happened, and we don't necessarily, I don't need an encyclopedic background on I want another interesting film with some obviously tie-in and some relation, but yeah, Yeah, that was, like I said, that was something I wrestled with while watching this. Like, are the things that I want from it just sort of symptoms of what films now give us, and would that ruin this movie? Yeah.
So, with you saying that, is this movie a hell of a picture for you?
Yeah, so like I just said, I was torn about what or how much more I wanted from this movie. I like the measured approach the film takes to doling out the horror. I like that it spends a lot of time with the characters in a very mundane way, but it may run a bit long in that. I can't get away from the idea that I want more. I don't know if this movie reached its own full potential. What I would have liked to see was more surrealism. I would have liked sort of like those images that came up in her hallucinations. I thought that was really interesting. I could have done with a bit more surrealism creeping in.
Yeah.
And maybe I might be punishing this movie for being of its time or of its genre of the time. And maybe adding more of what I want ruins it, but it just didn't quite get there for me. Really good film, not a hell of a picture.
Ooh, okay, interesting. Yeah, the surrealism part is kind of some of the most interesting parts of the film, for sure.
Yeah, like she's floating on her bed in the water and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's like an interesting, and like talking about like she's in the like we're on the yacht and there's like the captain and like it's like really weird, and then there's like the part where she's like the neighbor is like a nun, and then there's like this interesting device that Polanski uses where he like the audio track is like put out of like it's like weirdly like it's not like syncing properly, so it's like given this like weird there's like things like that which I think like are really interesting. I agree with you, like I feel like maybe the film maybe would have benefited a little more from that, but like again for me I like sort of that the slow burn of this film. I like that it's definitive in its choices in like how characters are presented, and specifically with the end. I think it's like something like we'd never seen before, and frankly we've never kind of really seen since. It's like this idea of like when she comes in, I mentioned it earlier, and it's like, oh my God, this feeling of like like normalcy. And it's just like, okay, you're in on this now too. And then it's like, wait, what? And it's like, oh my God. So yeah, and I think it's iconic, and yeah, for things like we mentioned earlier, where like I was just talking about the poster and alone, I'm just like so struck with that. And it just kind of gets burned in your head, that image. So for me, it is a hell of a picture. For you, it's not, which means it doesn't get put into the Hall of Fame. No hell of a picture this time around, which is always nice. We can disagree on these, and I like that. I like when that happens.
Yeah,
so
we can come back to it. Like when we have these divisive ones, we've talked about this before. Sort of revisiting, discussing again, seeing how if it's been given a chance to breathe. Have we changed our minds, or do we have new thoughts? And that could be an interesting exercise as well.
It's for sure, and I think that's what's great about it. And I like how you mentioned you don't know if it's like your own sort of biases towards horror or like scary movies, whatever kind of like leans you a certain way to begin with. Because I think we can do that when we talk about the film next week. So for you sort of we got into this Polanski. We did a little run we did Chinatown last week. We did Rosemary's Baby this week. We're getting out of talking about Polanski stuff. But you didn't see this movie. And again, it's sort of a genre that you're not super in love with, but obviously you're open to. But for next week,
this is the kind of horror. Sorry, just said this is the kind of horror that I can really dig. I did.
Yeah,
like I said,
right.
This was really close for me. Yeah. I wrestled quite a bit, but I just had to come down the way I did. But
absolutely,
very close.
Which makes sense. But next week we're diving into a genre that you love, and I have not seen this movie, and you've talked about this movie and you've praised this movie earlier on this podcast. And yeah, I get my first taste of this movie. And that's how this is how we're connecting these two movies, because they couldn't be any different. Do you want to tell everybody what we're doing next week?
No, there is no reasonable connection to be drawn here. I don't know if we had dug really deep, maybe we could have found like a best boy grip who worked on both films or something. I don't know, or maybe the son of a best boy or the distant relation. Who knows? But when we made our transition to noir and we made our switch from Jackie Brown to LA Confidential, we debated going two different directions. We had the 1997 connection to LA Confidential, which led us down our noir path, which is the eventual route we took. The other option we could have gone with then, if everyone recalls, was a Tarantino connection, because he was given an EP or just a producer credit on this movie when it got its American release. He really championed this film. He was one of the driving forces to bring it to America, because initially it was just a Chinese-only release. And that is the Jet Li historical epic Hero, a film that I have long loved, but it has been a long time since I've seen it. So I'm really excited to come back to it and see if maybe my feelings on it have changed. Maybe my opinions have changed. But I do know one person who shares my passion for this movie. Your brother, the Bill Man. He spoke glowingly of this film to you, I believe.
He did. It's funny. I feel like we keep referencing my slew of siblings that I'll listen. Well, most of them listen, not all of them, but a lot of Jess, my sister, her favorite movie is Rosemary's Baby. We just did it. Bill Man is a huge a lover of Hero, and he said he wrote me a message when he heard us talking about it on the Jackie Brown episode, and he said, "I watched Hero in theaters every Sunday afternoon for 2 months straight." So he saw it in theaters for like 8 times.
Amazing.
He loves it. And I've never seen it. And that's sort of that run of like the early 2000s where there was like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, House of a Thousand Daggers, like Hero, these sort of like, these Kung Fu imported films that kind of became huge in America. I'm excited to talk about Hero and see where that brings us. Cause I've only heard good things about this movie, but it's also hard. It's a tricky, I tried to track it down so far. It's a bit of a tricky one to track down. It's like not on, it is on streaming. It is, you can rent it. I usually sometimes, good. I'm a physical release guy. So I try to track down the physical release first. And if I can't, then like there was no like crazy, Blu-ray, like special released Blu-ray or anything. It's on DVD, but I can try to, go to some used stores and try to track it down first, and then
try the bargain bin at Piper's.
You'll
find that.
Exactly.
I want to do something that sort of breaks with tradition, but I think it is germane for this in this case. So usually we announce films 1 week at a time. And we don't sort of give it away where it's going to go any further than that. I'm going to break with that this time. And because I want people to go into this, if you do watch along with us, and I want you to know this because obviously you're going to watch, the subsequent film to Hero is going to be Rocky IV. And I'm telling you this because, yes, it's going to seem odd. And there is a connection there. And now the obvious one would be that they are both pugilistic films, but that is not the connection. Just the fact that they are both kind of martial arts movies after a fashion. There is another connection there, which, interestingly enough, the reason why your brother Bill comes up again here, because Bill was the first time I saw Rocky IV was in your basement with Bill and you, and Bill told me something about that movie that stuck with me, and it connects it to Hero. So we've got a real Bill Man tie-in here, and it's So when you go into Hero, consider what might tie it to Rocky IV.
Yeah, because I have no idea.
I think it's going to be interesting. No. Ostensibly there would be no. Certainly, superficially, there is no real connection beyond the fighting aspects of them, I suppose. But that is not the connection. So, bring that in with you when you watch Hero.
All right, I will. Rocky 4 is I think it's my favorite Rocky.
It's a damn good Rocky. It is a damn good Rocky.
Yeah, there. A lot of the Rocky movies are good, like including the sort of the most recent sort of films with Michael B. Jordan. Yeah, like the Creed movies. Like the first Creed was like really great. Subsequent, not so great. But the Rocky franchise as a whole, I would argue, is like has some really great. I mean, obviously, it won Best Picture, didn't it? The first Rocky?
Yes, Rocky won Best Picture, and that's one of those ones that sort of gets people look. They're like, oh, interesting. Like everyone's always surprised to hear that, but it did. It did.
Yeah, so, it's yeah. Yeah, I mean, okay,
there might have been some missteps later in the franchise, but Rocky 4 certainly
Rocky 4,
certainly a great
Drago,
one.
Man. We love it. Okay, cool. All right, I'm excited. I'm excited, and I get to rewatch Rocky 4. So this is awesome. Yeah. So this is good. I'm gonna track down Hero, and we're gonna get to talking about it. Sweet. All right. So for David Hollinshurst, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and this has been another episode of Hell of a Pitcher.